Today we're peeling back all those dramatized myths of the Chernobyl catastrophe to deliver a gripping, entirely fact-based narrative. We are uncovering the true mechanics, the fatal human errors, and the long-term invisible scars of history's absolute worst nuclear accident. Let's move way beyond the Hollywood sensationalism to understand the actual sequence of events, the incredibly heroic actions of the first responders, and the profound psychological impacts that literally still echo through society decades later.
All right, let's just dive right into this. Put yourself in the cockpit of the very first helicopter to fly over Reactor 4 on the morning of April 26th. Imagine you're right there with Captain Volodin. He's flying in his shirt sleeves on a perfectly clear, cloudless day. But as he nears this massive plume of smoke and steam rising from the reactor hull, strange, viscous, radioactive droplets start beating on his windshield canopy. He looks down at his dosimeter, and the needle just completely maxes out, past 500 roentgens per hour. Suddenly, the Army major on board bursts into the cockpit, screaming, "You murderer! You've killed us all!" Part 1, the night of the explosion. 1:23 a.m., April 26, 1986.
So, to understand exactly how we got to that terrifying moment in the helicopter, we really need to trace back the timeline. It actually started the day before, on April 25th, when a routine safety test at the plant was delayed. And this delay was crucial because it meant this super delicate test was basically handed over to an unprepared night shift. By 1:23 a.m. on April 26th, there was an unexpected and super dangerous drop in the reactor's power. In a final, totally desperate attempt to regain control and shut down the reactor, operators pressed the emergency AZ5 button. But moments later, two massive explosions tore the 1,000-ton roof right off the reactor.
Now here is where things get absolutely terrifying. The AZ5 button. It was originally designed to be the ultimate emergency fail-safe, but because of some severe design flaws in the control rods and a highly unstable core at that exact moment, pressing AZ5 didn't stop the reaction at all. Actually, it accelerated it. It acted essentially as a detonator, triggering the fatal explosion instead of preventing it. Moving on to Part 2, Denial and the Fallout. A system built on secrets. You see, that immediate blast was really just the first ring of a massive ripple effect. It was instantly followed by a deadly wave of state-sponsored denial. On one hand, you have internal Soviet reports blatantly understating the catastrophe and completely denying any immediate risk to their own citizens. But contrast that with the actual reality. 2 days later, and over 1,000 miles away, safety engineers at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden detected dangerous radioactive surges simply by checking the soles of their own employees' shoes. I mean, that is how the world finally discovered the truth. And the human cost of that bureaucratic delay is staggering. 49,000. That's the entire population of Pripyat, the city built right next door to the plant. Those 49,000 residents were eventually evacuated on a massive fleet of 1,200 buses, never to return home. But because of the cover-up, this life-saving measure happened a full 36 hours after the explosion, a staggering 36 hours too late, while children played outside and everyday people literally breathed in the radioactive fallout. Which brings us to Part 3, the heroic liquidators, containing the uncontainable. In the incredibly chaotic aftermath, the liquidators took some frantic, desperate measures to contain the glowing core. First off, helicopter pilots flew directly through the highly radioactive plume just to drop sand and boron right into the exposed crater. Second, brave firefighters from Station Number 2 battled 600-foot flames. Many of them fought these fires in basic t-shirts with absolutely zero protective gear, physically tasting the metal in the air from the sheer amount of radiation. And third, plant employees literally waded into a pitch-black, contaminated basement to manually drain massive bubbler pools. If they hadn't, a secondary steam explosion could have rendered half of Europe entirely uninhabitable. Hearing the first-hand accounts really just makes this terrifyingly real. A nuclear physicist named Pryanishnikov watched the whole disaster unfold right from his 6th-floor balcony. He saw yellow and green flames flaring out from the torn ruins of the reactor. He knew instantly how bad it was, noting that the needle ran off the end of his dial. Yet, because of strict government secrecy, he had to sit there and watch his neighbors sunbathing the very next day, completely unaware of the danger, before they were later hospitalized with severe nausea.
Part 4, Myths versus Reality, separating fact from Hollywood sensationalism.
Because the actual truth here is way more complex than what Hollywood usually portrays, let's debunk some cultural myths right now. Did victims suffer immediate, spontaneous bleeding directly from radiation? No, false. That was from horrific thermal or steam burns. Radiation doesn't cause spontaneous bleeding like some horror movie villain. Okay, did the miners digging under the reactor work completely naked? False again. They did shed some clothes in the intense 50 degrees Celsius heat, but definitely not all of them. And what about the idea that people worked out of a fear of summary executions? Completely false. Threatening to shoot workers just wasn't common practice in the 1980s Soviet Union. These people acted out of an incredible sense of duty and sheer bravery, not because they were at the end of a gun barrel.
And hey, here's a fact that completely shifts our understanding. You've probably heard the story that the 3 heroic divers who waded into that radioactive water to drain the bubbler pools died weeks later of acute radiation syndrome, right? Well, surprisingly, they didn't. Shift leader Boris Baranov actually lived until 2005, dying of a heart attack. And chief engineers Alexei Ananenko and Valery Bespalov are literally still alive today. Their sacrifice was obviously immense, but the myth of their immediate demise is just that, a myth.
Finally, Part 5, the invisible long-term toll, the true cost of catastrophe. We've reached the outer edge of our ripple effect now. I really want to anchor the science to human experience here, using some incredible research from the Journal of Public Economics. This particular study by Danzer and Danzer investigates the subjective well-being of the broader, low-dose population 20 years after the disaster. It looks right past the immediate victims to see exactly how the rest of the country was impacted over the long haul.
Now, you might naturally assume that everyone in the region suffered severe physical radiation poisoning, but actually 96% of the affected population received very low subclinical radiation doses. We are talking about an additional dose equal to just half of the annual natural background radiation. To put that in perspective, it's roughly the equivalent of getting 10 medical chest x-rays. So physically speaking, their exposure was really minimal.
Yet, as the data clearly shows, the invisible toll was just massive. Even with that subclinical physical exposure, the psychological damage was profound. We see a huge drop in subjective well-being, a 20% standard deviation decrease. You're looking at a traumatized society that ended up relying much more heavily on government transfers just to survive. And the broader economic impact? An annual aggregate welfare loss equating to roughly 2 to 5.5% of Ukraine's entire GDP? The anxiety, the dread, and that complete loss of agency basically crippled a huge portion of the population. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. What really is the true legacy of Chernobyl? When the invisible scars of anxiety, depression, and shattered survival probabilities far outlast the physical fallout, consider how the psychological and socioeconomic destruction of a society can actually be the longest-lasting poison of all.